welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy Firian Rising, and this is English Nerd. So again, I know that I'm putting out a ton of these videos lately, but it is for the benefit of my students since we're now doing distance learning. Hopefully this has been useful for you as well if you're not part of that group. So today, in All About a Tale of Two Cities, I'm going to talk about Book 2, Chapter 10 and 11, so that's Two Promises and a Companion Picture. Or the beginning of the section of the book I like to call The Bachelorette, London Edition, because apparently every single person is in love with Lucie, who is put on this pedestal as a sort of perfect, angelic being with no flaws. Every other character in the story is a bit more interesting than she is, but she is pretty good, I suppose. So we're going to start with chapter 10. As usual, make sure that you've read the chapter before watching this. It's not meant to be a substitute for this awesome book. It's meant to be a supplement in addition to it. So Two Promises opens and we find out that a year has passed, which puts us at 1781. More or less, we know that a year and 4 months have passed since the trial in 1780, so it's probably still 1781. And Darnay has fallen madly in love with Lucie, so the story picks up with him meeting with Dr. Manette to ask for her hand in marriage, essentially, or at least to declare his already super obvious intentions. So he goes to the house in Soho with those echoing, those footsteps sounding echoes, and Dr. Manette responds this way. Charles Darnay, I rejoice to see you. We've been counting on your return these 3 or 4 days past. Mr. Stryver and Sidney Carton were both here yesterday, and both made you out to be more than due. 2 things. 1, consider how different a greeting that is to Darnay's literal family, his uncle, the Marquis, in the previous chapter, who was admitting that he would be willing to throw him indefinitely into prison or kill him. Dr. Manette genuinely seems to like Darnay, despite that moment of dread when he first sees him at the trial. If you want to go back to the video on congratulatory, which is chapter 4, you can do that. But yeah, so notice that this family that Darnay's trying to choose is a lot more welcoming than his actual family, the nobility back in France. And then Mr. Stryver and Sidney Carton were both here yesterday and both made you out to be more than due. I think that's kind of funny because these 2 lawyers are also, we find out, they like Lucie if they're not courting her. And they both are kind of trying to undermine Darnay, who's the front runner in all this. It's like, oh man, he hasn't been around for a while. And Darnay can tell. He's like, oh, I'm so glad they're interested in what I'm doing. But he recovers quickly and just jumps right into it. He says that he loves Lucie fondly, dearly, disinterestedly, devotedly. If ever there were love in the world, I love her. And his love is notably selfless. As the conversation continues, he talks about how he knows how important Lucie is to Dr. Manette's continued recovery from his trauma, even though it's been 6 years or so, or even more at this. 6 years. And so he says, I don't want to take her away from you. I want to basically join your family, if that's all right, and to strengthen the bonds between you guys, even as I'm forging my own, which is pretty selfless. You'd think most people would want to take Lucie to, a separate home or something, but even to that degree, Darnay is willing to compromise for her. Dr. Manette does not handle this news well because, again, of his old trauma. His wife, he had to leave her unexpectedly, permanently, and that fear of being alone and abandoned, I think, is really quite strong with him. It says in the middle of the chapter, a struggle was evident a struggle was evidently in his face, talking about Dr. Manette. A struggle with that occasional look which had a tendency in it to dark doubt and dread. And at this point, I don't think it's because of the reasons we saw that same expression on his face earlier. Now I believe he trusts Darnay. He likes Darnay. It's just this fear that things will change after they get together, if they do get together. So the chapter again is called Two Promises, and so there are two promises made in the chapter. And the first one is that Darnay has Dr. Manette promise that if Lucie ever comes to him and says, you know what, Dad, I really love Darnay, then he will tell her how Darnay feels about her. So Dr. Manette promises, yes, if she comes to me and tells me that she loves you, I will tell her that you love her, and then you can all get together and it'll be happy. And in the midst of this, there's an unpleasant moment with Dr. Manette I want to point out. So the doctor fades into silence in the middle of their conversation, and then he picks it up saying, "You said something to me," said Dr. Manette, breaking into a smile. "What was it you said to me?" He just goes into complete abstraction, and that is super reminiscent of the shoemaker chapter, where he would constantly say, "Were you speaking to me? What were you saying?" He couldn't hold a thought in his head for very long, and so there's massive red flags that he's going to have a relapse here. But the second promise is probably the more important promise, at least plot-wise, here. So the first promise is that Dr. Manette will inform Lucie that Darnay feels the same way if she says that she loves him. And then the second promise is that Darnay promises he will tell Dr. Manette his real name on the morning of his wedding if he ends up marrying Lucie. To his credit, Darnay wants to come clean. He wants to say, hey, my real name's not actually Charles Darnay, it's something else. I would like to let you know what that is and why that is. And Dr. Manette just says, stop. Nope, stop talking. If you get married, you can tell me the day you're going to get married. And I think the reason he says this is that he suspects something about the family of Darnay, and he doesn't want to be a factor in ruining any of his daughter's chances of happiness if he were to freak out and say, no, you can't marry her. That's my theory, at least. And then at the end of the chapter, he goes back to a little bit of shoemaking, but it's very temporary. He falls asleep after he hammers some shoes for a bit, so they're concerned, but it seems like the danger is past. Seems like Darnay is definitely the front runner. Enter chapter 11, a companion picture. So a companion picture is all about Stryver and Carton. We see them in a very similar situation to what we saw in the Jackal chapter. Basically, they're just drinking ungodly amounts of punch and working, and Stryver is criticizing Carton, and that's kind of their whole shtick. But Stryver informs Carton that he is planning to marry, and not for money, and it's Lucie Manette. And before he announces all of this, he is mysterious and goes, you know how I'm much better with the ladies than you are, Carton. You're always just hanging around, and you insulted this person before. You called her a golden-haired doll, which he did. Anyway, I like when Stryver announces that he wants to be with Lucie Manette, because it's a weird pairing. But there are a couple noteworthy items, especially at the end of this short little chapter. Great use of repetition, which is what I'm going to point out first. So Stryver says, "The young lady is Miss Manette. If you, Carton, had been a fellow of any sensitiveness or delicacy of feeling in that kind of way, Sidney, I might have been a little resentful of your calling her a golden-haired doll. But you are not." And then it says, Sidney Carton drank the punch at a great rate, drank it by bumpers, looking at his friend. And that's repeated, the drinking the punch. Still drinking the punch. Why should I be astonished? Still drinking the punch. Why should I not approve? He doesn't actually answer any of the questions that Stryver puts to him. Like, do you approve? Are you feeling good about this? Instead, he just starts like shooting down this punch and just returning the questions back at him. And Stryver's such a confident guy that he assumes that this means, oh yeah, everything's fine, of course. Lucie will say yes, of course, Carton is for this idea. But Carton, still drinking the punch, rejoined, why should I be astonished? You approve? Carton, still drinking the punch, rejoined, why should I not approve? I mean, Carton, from his reaction, is clearly affected by this announcement, and he just doesn't know how to handle it. And so he just falls back into his old habits. But in my opinion, there's some humor there as well with the repetition. Okay, in this announcement as well, Stryver explains why he's planning to get married. And it's obvious that Dickens wants us to contrast this with the previous chapter with Darnay. So Stryver says, I don't care about fortune. She is a charming creature, and I have made up my mind to please myself. On the whole, I think I can afford to please myself. She will have in me a man already pretty well off, and a rapidly rising man, and a man of some distinction. It is a piece of good fortune for her, but she is worthy of good fortune. Are you astonished? He is so selfish in his love. Here, he says, I've made up my mind to please myself. On the whole, I can afford to please myself. This is good fortune for her, but, she deserves some of this. He just is so prideful and selfish in the way that he goes about this. It's nothing to do with her, what he likes about her or how he plans to help and serve her, like we heard with Darnay earlier. Instead, it's just, I want to please myself. She's really gorgeous, and I feel like might as well. That's Stryver for you. And then the chapter ends with Stryver giving Carton the recommendation to marry as well. You should just marry like a landlady or something so she can take care of you when you're old and sick, because that'll come sooner rather than later with your nasty alcoholic habits and not sleeping through the night. It's poor Carton in this chapter. It's just very depressing for him. But intriguing for us, because now we know that there are 3 people out to get Lucie, and it's not perfectly clear what's going to happen with all of that romantic intrigue. So if you have any questions at all, put those down below. Like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness, and I will see you next time. Bye.